Yep, we'll be getting started in just a few minutes. And I just saw that Dr. Brian Bird just joined the call. So welcome, Brian. We have folks joining from all over the world. So it's just going to take a few minutes. The entry rate here is quite high into the meeting. So we'll give it another minute or so and we'll get started. All right, good morning, everyone. Let's see here. All right, people are still joining, quite a few. We'll wait just another minute or so. Good morning, Jacksonville. Thanks for joining us today. Good morning, James. Ah, you're back. Fantastic. While we are waiting as these folks join in for, we're going to be sending some of these certificates out from last week. We're just getting them together. And so our goal here is to get these sent out actually by the end of the day. If you did not receive your certificate from last week, let's say if it's Tuesday morning, just make sure you email education@nola.gov and your name and all the information there. And we'll talk a little bit about certificates for today in a minute. But we are still admitting quite a few folks. Give it another minute or two. All right, let's see. Yes, Courtney. So you'll need to send another email to education@nola.gov. Good morning, Lewis. Good morning, Shauna. From Oklahoma, excellent. Puerto Rico, good morning. Actually, good afternoon. Oh, yeah, still good morning for you. And Courtney Matthews, yes, you'll need to send another email. Okay, I think it slowed down a little bit. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so look, welcome everyone to the part 2 of our webinar, mosquito identification class. So just a little bit of information about last week as well. We will be working through those certificates. There are quite a few, and we will eventually get that webinar onto the website. We just have to do some, prep for it. So once that is all done and all 3 sessions are done, we'll get those on. Really need everybody to, if you want to stay updated on different events that are coming up, please go to vectoroutreach.org. You can go to the website and sign up to subscribe to get information. We actually have some really great webinars that are coming up. But for today is part 2. So we're really excited about this. And this is a joint effort between the City of New Orleans, Gulf South Vector, as well as Beacons. And so Beacons is a work group that deals with invasive species. So next week on May 29th, that is going to be all about invasive species, specifically in Florida, in the Gulf Coast region. But today, we've got some wonderful speakers that are going to be talking about Culex and Psorophora and Uranotaenia and some other species that you might run across. And so next slide, Alex. There are some procedures, all right? If you could kindly keep your line on mute, we will be watching the voice and everything, but please make sure that you put your questions in the chat box. I'll be monitoring throughout the whole webinar. And then at the very end, Astacia, who's helping us behind the scenes, will step in and we'll make sure that all these questions are answered. Now, We do provide CEs, a continuing education for the state of Florida, as well as Louisiana sanitarians. So if you are going to be getting would like CEs, you have to be engaged. We will be monitoring attendance and participation in the questions as well. We have a big cohort from California, and so if you want a certificate of completion, please make sure that you are answering those questions. And again, we'll be monitoring attendance. So all of that. If you would like a certificate, please email education@nola.gov. I need you to include your full name, your title, and your email address. So we'll be monitoring that and grabbing that information, sending it out to you. And this is good for 2 hour if you are getting CEs. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. And if you want to go to the next question or next slide. So we have some wonderful speakers here today. We've got today actually Alex and James are going to be our participants. Eric's information is going to be in the link. But these guys are amazing. So as far as taxonomists, here at the City of New Orleans, we identified a species, and they have a tremendous collection of insects, including mosquitoes. So they're really going to show you what they do in the lab, right? And how do you get from a mosquito that you may not know what it is all the way down to species. So they're going to be tag teaming the event. And like anything, we start at the beginning and get more complex throughout the 2 hours. So I'm going to take it away, give it to Alex to take it away. Alex.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm here with James. Unfortunately, Eric can't join us, but so you're stuck with us today.
I thought you were going to say you were here with me, unfortunately, man. Right out the gate.
But today is our session 2. So our topics for today, we're going to just do a very, very brief review of some of the topics that we covered in session 1 that just kind of helps reiterate kind of the things we're talking about today. We're then going to go over Culex identification, Psorophora identification, Uranotaenia, then Mansonia species and Cochleartidia perturbans, and then finally Culecida species. So if you didn't join us in the first session, just a reminder that this following subset that we're going to cover today doesn't include all species that are found in the Gulf South, but this like kind of group that we have curated for today are just commonly found in our region, as well as species that share many characteristics and might be misidentified with each other. So we're going to do a lot of comparing and contrasting when possible, but you can utilize like all the things we're talking about to compare all the species that we're going over today. But as always, it's always important to familiarize yourself with the species found in and around your area so that you are ready to kind of tackle identification in your area and what you may get in your traps. And so before we get into it, just another reminder that we have our Mosquito Academy coming up this September, from September 22nd to the 24th. So the course that we are doing today is a subset of our identification course, which happens on the 3rd day of our Mosquito Academy. If you are interested in getting more training with identification, this event is a really great way to get some hands-on experience. So we provide sample boxes to every one of our participants. They have their own microscope, and they get a lot of time to play around with those specimens and really see them from all angles and not just look at pictures of them. So it's a really, really great experience. And then the first 2 days of the Mosquito Academy, we are following an integrated pest management like core pillars and get really hands-on experiences like learning and experiencing all of that. We will be sending out our topics list for our Mosquito Academy shortly. So you can register following this QR code on the bottom left, or you can just be on the lookout for our topics list that'll come out hopefully in the next week or 2. So just to start as a review from last week, we wanted to start off by just kind of reiterating some of the ways that we can tell our male and female mosquitoes apart. Just because this is extremely important as a first step before you start looking at any identification or any markers for identification. You want to make sure that we're separating our males from our females. So we reviewed 3 major ways that you can tell the difference between male and female mosquitoes last time. The first thing you can look at is their antenna. So if we look at our male on the left, you can see that their antennae are really, really bushy, right? It looks kind of like paintbrushes, where our females are going to have a lot less bushy antennae. The other thing we can look at is their palps. So for our male mosquitoes, they're going to be long and also bushy, just like their antenna. Whereas our females are going to have very, very short palps. Now, very big caveat here. As we reviewed last time, we're not going to cover Anopheles today, but as we covered last time, our Anopheles species are going to have palps that are as long as the proboscis for our female mosquitoes. So always that's something to double check when you're looking at your species and getting to that genus level. And then finally, the last thing that we can look at is if we look on the abdomen, our female mosquitoes, this is like a dorsal view of the abdomen. They're going to have a much more like receded or repressed cerci, whereas our male mosquitoes, you're gonna really see this prominent feature right here. And when we look at a live picture, this is a really good view of it. On the left-hand side, we have our female mosquito with that rounded abdomen. You don't see those claspers, whereas on the right-hand side, we have a male Psorophora howardii, which have these really prominent claspers right here. Each species is going to have like different. This is going to look different in each species, but for our male mosquitoes, it's not something that you're going to be able to confuse. You'll really see those cerci really prominently featured right there. So it's three major ways that you can tell your male and female mosquitoes apart from each other. The other thing that we wanted to review is our apical versus basal banding pattern. So we harped on this a lot last week, and it's going to be again today, something that is a really important way not only to separate or get in the genus level, but also within these species that we have here to tell them apart. So this pattern can be displayed both on the abdomen and or the legs. So if we look at our abdomen right here, on the left-hand side, we have a basal banding pattern. So this red dotted line is showing you that abdominal segment. So as we reviewed last time, we have abdominal segments, right? So it's this repeating pattern, right? Basal, because it's coming from, Eric gave a really good way to remember this, basal before. So before, coming closer to that thorax, whereas apical is going to be after. So this is one thing that you should really just kind of keep reminding yourself over. And then if we look at our legs over here, the same banding pattern can occur in our legs. Same thing here. These red lines are showing one segment of the legs. And you can have that banding pattern either, like you can have an either basal banding pattern and apical, or some species show both an apical and basal banding pattern. So very important just to be on the lookout for this, and we're going to be really showing this again and again and again throughout this talk today, but always a good thing to remind yourself over when you're doing ID. And the last thing we just want to reiterate is that you're going to have differences in your sample quality. So this is a really great way to look at. This is two of the same, these are both Culex quincunfasciatus samples. And you can see the major difference in just like the remaining scales that are left on these samples. So your sample quality is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors. The trap you use is really, really important. Some traps, they have to travel through like the blade, whereas other ones, they kind of nicely enter into that trap. And so they might maintain a lot more of those scales, but also like the presence of other bycatch, how crowded that trap is, how you freeze them and transport them back to your lab, all are going to play a major role. We will mention a lot today that there's some scales that fall off or rub off far more frequently than others. So that's why it's very important to be comfortable with a lot of different ways to speciate your samples rather than just relying on one specific scaling pattern. But sometimes you only will have one available to you.
Sometimes none, you know, and which, like we touched on last time, or if you weren't here for the last talk, you just can't get the species sometimes because the sample of the quality of the sample is just so beat to what. And especially in these CDC light traps where we're targeting a wide variety of different species, we get a lot of moths, we get a lot of scarab beetles, which end up munching on some of these mosquitoes. So I'm sitting there digging mosquitoes out of the abdomens of these beetles, I guess the gastrin, and you can just get the genus because everything is gone. So important to keep in mind, don't beat yourself up if there's nothing there to get it to species. If you're able to get the genus, that's at least something.
Yeah. don't beat yourself up if your mosquitoes are beat up.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, never, you don't need to force an ID. And that's something that we always try to reiterate. Getting to that genus level is very, very good. Especially if you're new in your ID career. But if you do have a pretty beat up sample, like the one on the right here, what you can do is look for where those remaining scales are, if you remain, and kind of draw out that pattern or see where those scales are that kind of like, you kind of can look at it as like an artistic lens to see like what shape is this kind of coming. So here on this left-hand side, we're going to get into Culex quincunfasciatus, but they have this half moon shape right here. On the sample on the right, you can kind of start seeing where those scales are, and in your mind kind of looking and seeing if you can kind of see that exact shape that you're looking for. So, but that again, you don't want to like just talk yourself into an ID. Don't force it if you don't have the right things to really help you get to that level.
Yeah, right. Because one could be a vector, one not. If you're submitting samples for this purpose, you want to get it as right as you can.
So we're going to start off with Culex identification. As a warning, this is going to be probably the hardest group that we're going to go over today, just because as adults, Culex are pretty similar all around. They're all pretty like medium sized, brownish, drab colors. There's not a lot of like really cool scaling patterns that just jump off the screen that make you be like, okay, this is really easy. So we like to say too, like, I think for me personally, the larval identification of Culex is really easy, or much easier than the adults. But we're going to start off pretty difficult here, and then the rest of the talks, it's going to be a lot easier moving forward. But just as a review here, we're not going to go through all of these specifically right now, but it's important to know, when we talk about getting to that species level, the importance of it. There's a lot of different reasons why getting to that species level is really important. Different Culex are responsible for different, like, are medically important for different reasons, spreading different or vectors for different diseases, but also like where their larval habitat is. So it's really important for your staff or your program to get to that species level with these Culex, because you can be targeting different habitats that they may be in, and that helps your control decisions of where you're going to send your people, where you're going to do larvicide treatments or adulticide treatments. But as a review, when we're talking about our Culex genus, these are going to be pretty small to medium-sized brownish mosquitoes, typically, pretty common across the whole genus. Like I said, that larval identification can be a really great way if you have the access, or if you're sampling those in the field rather than rearing them to adults. And in our Mosquito Academy, we are going to have a larval identification section. So we're not going to get into larval ID here, but I know that our session 3 will touch on some larval identification as well from Mike Riles. But for shared common characteristics, Culex are going to have narrow wing scales, right? So this kind of long grass, what did you call it last time?
Long grain rice.
Long grain rice on their wings. They're going to have a rounded abdomen. And importantly, the base of that subcostal vein does not have that CT. So that armpit hair, which we're going to get into when we talk about our Culecida, our Culex do not have that present.
Yeah, and another thing moving forward, like, don't freak out because he's saying the Culex are difficult. It's just it is what it is. I think our job today is to try to point out at least one really cool characteristic of each species we cover. And put it in the back of your mind. Sometimes you can't even identify things if they're in your hand, much less the species. And like there's some birds you have to identify by measuring the width of their tail feathers. It could be worse. So we're gonna find something that's gonna make y'all like Culex today.
So we're gonna start off, and if you weren't with us in session 1, the way that if there's kind of 2 species that are pretty commonly misidentified, a lot of times we're gonna compare and contrast them. But again, you can use what we're talking about to kind of compare the other ones in this group later on as well. So first, we're going to start off with Culex quincunfasciatus. This is the southern house mosquito. So it's indistinguishable from Culex pipiens in the north, but they're all part of the same species complex. This is our primary West Nile vector in our region. So very important mosquito that we are, specifically like targeting in our traps and testing weekly. So very important to, get this one down pat. These are opportunistic breeders. So, we've seen them everywhere. Early in the season when there's not that much, open water, because they really like, dirty,
Stagnant.
stagnant water with a lot of organic content. But if there's not that available, they're going to be looking for habitats to lay their egg grafts everywhere. So we've seen them in waste tires. I've seen them in bromeliads, which is crazy. But then we also see them in, large construction ditches, septic ditches, kind of everywhere. So they're just really finding the best opportunity, and they're going to find it. And even we've seen them underground as well, when they're trying to overwinter. So we've seen them underneath our in our storm drain systems as well when we've sampled in there. They prefer to feed on birds, but will feed on humans and dogs as well, which make them, very important in, our West Nile, Eastern equine encephalitis, Western, St. Louis encephalitis, and other arboviruses that are endemic in the United States. And again, like I said, they're a primary West Nile virus vector in the Gulf South. So the first things first that we're going to look at is the main thing that people look at for our Culex quincunfasciatus, which is when we look at our abdomen, they have this very distinctive banding pattern displayed. So on their abdomen, they have these basal bands that are half moon shaped. So we're going to show a little bit a picture in the next slide that's going to really show that shape, but this is going to be most prominent on segments 4 and 5. So if we look right here, you can see right here when we highlight segments 4 and 5, you really see that distinctive half moon shape. So these pale scales are coming down pretty deep on here, which when we talk about our differences in our sample quality, you can really highlight or zoom into this area of this segment and see if you're seeing those pale scales all the way down here, which is going to be very distinctive compared to something else that just has a broad straight band.
And again, if you want to memorize something in your own head that helps you remember a feature like the half moon, most people use that. You can look at it and say it's segment 5. You've got 5 half vanilla moon pies, and you can remember it like that.
I've never heard that before. I'm so sorry for him. So like we said before, if these scales fall off, you can really harp in, that's what I'm saying right here. You can kind of draw out that half moon shape in your mind when you see this, and you can kind of see the remnants of that. And then when we look at the abdominal sternites, there's no definitive scaling here, just kind of uniform coloration. When we look at the thorax, I mean, you can take it away, James.
Yeah, and looking at the thorax in general here, starting from the generic standpoint, what you want to look at in Culex is whether that scutum has a row of stiff setae. On the left picture, you can see some standing up. That'll be down the center. So this is going to be important when separating subgenera within Culex, because there's going to be a group of 3 that we kind of talk about that don't have these setae running down the center of the scutum.
Yeah, so he meant the picture on the right here. So
Yeah.
Right here, these setae fall off pretty easily, but you can see where these pores are if you kind of focus in right here, where these setae were. So we're not gonna. This is shared amongst many species in our Culex genus, but we're not going to harp on this on all the ones that kind of share this, but we're going to highlight it later on of the one that we're going to cover today, but the other ones that don't have this. So this is a very good first step when you're looking at your Culex, just to differentiate the kind of 2 groups within there.
Yeah, that'll usually be the first part of if you're using dichotomous key as well.
Yep. Otherwise, they have a pretty unremarkable scaling pattern otherwise on their scutum. On their scutum, they're always going to be lacking these pale scale spots, which is something that we're going to use to compare with Culex restruens. And then laterally on their thorax, they're going to have patches of scales with 6 or more scales in there. So when you focus in on there, you're going to see individual scales, and they're going to be in groups of more than 6. Looking at the head, there's going to be no banding on the palpi or the proboscis. And then on the top of the head, there's several light or tan pale erect forked scales in the median area of the vertex and occiput, which is kind of hard to see here. I think we highlight it right here. So this is something that I think that Mike Riles is going to go over in depth in session 3. So we're not going to take his thunder away, because he has some really great pictures of this to highlight this, but this is another thing that we can look at, especially if you have a lot of scales missing. This can be something as like a full-on backup, last-ditch effort to look at these samples. No banding on the legs, so pretty unremarkable there. And so now let's move to Culex restruens.
I often say don't count on color. There's going to be some exceptions to that rule, which really isn't even a rule. But if you get a Culex restruens that's in super good shape, it's going to tend to be a little more reddish. So if you've got a pile of Quincke fasciatus, which from here on out we'll use shorthand for quinks if you're not familiar with that. If you hear us say quinks, we're talking about Quincke fasciatus. The restruens in good shape will be kind of reddish. If we go, look at the quinks before, especially if they've got eggs or they're going to be swollen and kind of yellowish. And so a lot of your quinks in your nets will be kind of yellow with the moon pie going across. And so you'll get a basic restruens here. It's kind of like, not kind of like a cherry color, but it tends to be a little more red. But the thing you want to look at is the banding going across and there looks kind of like, wait, go back.
Oh, sorry.
They're real. Do you have a closer?
Yeah, we're going to go to the bands in a little bit. Yeah.
Just keep an eye on that. And then remember segment number 5. They're pretty similar to quinks in their behavior. But what's strange is that we tend to see more restruens in the fall and the winter here. And I can't really find anything published that dictates that, because other places get them year round as far as I know. I don't know why it would be just a local thing here, but we definitely trend upwards in the fall when it's cooler with this species than quinks. They also are a vector of West Nile and St. Louis.
So first we can look at the thorax. So like we said when we were looking at the quinks will never have these two pale spots present. This isn't something that is always going to be the case on your restruens, but some display this. This is a very easy scaling pattern that rubs off quickly. Thankfully, Eric's not here. He disagrees with ever seeing this. But we do see some restruens that do present these two pale dots on the scutum. But again, that's not something that you should just only base it off of. If you don't have those two pale spots, don't automatically rule out restruens. And then shared like with quinks, they're going to have scale patches laterally on their thorax that are in groups of 6 or more pale scales.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about with the abdomen. So the shape there of the basal banding, it's more clean. It comes across straighter. It looks more like the center of an ice cream sandwich than the moon pie. And so if you've got them in good shape, they're going to stand out. They will pop amongst those quinks if they're in really good shape. And the banding's really nicely clean cut. Yeah.
The thing to remember too here, and when we talk about some other Culex that we'll cover today, that these both quinks and restruens have a broad band. They have a difference in the shape, but it's both broad. Some Culex that we're going to cover today have a very thin or no band present when you look at this dorsal view. So Culex restruens are going to have this broad band, and it's going to be a straighter band rather than that moon pie shape.
I see now you're saying it.
I hate it. So this is a little better version, so you can kind of see this like straight across. So it doesn't have that, like, I would say like maybe like a tapering kind of scaling pattern on the sides right here. You're really going to see it straight across. And on the right-hand side, we have like a really beat up one, but this is a great way to kind of look what we talked about. If you have a beat up sample, you could, let's say we're looking at segment 5 right here. You're kind of going in here and you're not seeing any pale scales kind of down here where that moon shape would extend to. So again, looking at what you have available to you, it would be great if all of our samples look like the picture on the left, but a lot of times you're going to have this pretty much looking like what it looks on the right, and you're going to be really looking at those scaling patterns and seeing where those remaining ones exist if they do. When you look at the abdomen laterally, you're going to also see patches of scales as well.
Yeah, and this is a feature that's shared with a few other Culex as well. But just pointing it out that it is there in this one.
No banding on the palpi or the proboscis. And when we look at those scales on the vertex and the occiput, they're going to be dark scaled. So they're darker than our quinks, which should be like tanner or a little bit more pale, which you can see kind of right here. And then again, no banding on the legs. This is going to be shared amongst many of our Culex that were covered today, but a few of the ones in our region will have banding on their legs. So that is a great kind of easy identifier or way to rule out some species. So just to review the similarities between these two, they both are going to have scale patches laterally on their thorax in groups of 6 or more. And they're both going to have broad banding on their abdominal segments. But when we look at the differences between the two, that broad banding is going to have a different shape to it. So our Culex quinques are going to have this half moon shape. And you can see this is a great picture right here where it's not as evident, right, in these earlier segments. But when you get down to like segment 5 and 4, you're going to really see that shape in comparison to this straight across band for Culex restruens. And then another difference that I would say don't harp on too much is that they may have these 2 pale spots present on your restruens versus no definitive scaling pattern on your scutum of your Culex quinque fasciatus.
It's really nice when those spots are there, but I would say personally, definitely less than 25% of what I see has them, just to kind of give you an idea.
So next we're going to move to Culex salinarius and Culex nigripalpus.
Salinarius is, I started off way back doing an idea. I was like, wow, this is a really cool mosquito. It's pretty obvious, and it is really reddish, and that kind of holds true for most of the sows. They are a permanent water breeder, so they'll be out in the marsh more than a lot of your other Culex. They feed on birds and mammals. They are vectors of Triple E, St. Louis, and West Nile encephalitis. I said I used to like them because this week, hold on, I got this number right. This week alone, in 3 of our light traps, we had roughly 5,400 salinarius alone. So they are popping right now big time.
Yeah, I think it's for us when we are finding them, we do find them in extremely large, like high populations or high numbers in our traps, especially in our CEC light traps and our BG Sentinel traps.
And now, I don't know what their flight range is, but they'll move from the marsh into the city too, because we're getting them in neighborhoods. It's not just our rural traps. But if any of you were in the last talk and saw that dish with the 29,000, like half of that were these.
So first we can look at the thorax here. So they're going to have several patches of scales on laterally on the thorax. And these scale patches are going to have 6 or more scales in it. So similar to our quinques and our restruens that we just covered. And just to kind of give this idea, like highlighted right here, here's one with like a little bit of rub, but even with that, like the scales rubbing off in this circle on the right, you can see that there's 7 of these remaining scales. So again, it's more than 6 or more scales in each one of these patches. So a very great way to differentiate our salinarius with our nigripalpus that's coming up.
And yeah, and it's good to remember that, because for some reason salinarius tends to hold those scales better than nigripalpus, and I don't have a justification why.
And so a very defining thing for our salinarius here is that they're going to have basal banding on the abdomen, but unlike the 2 species we just covered, it's going to be very narrow. When you're looking at the dorsal view, it's going to be very narrow or absent altogether until the last 3 segments. So you can see really the difference just when we compared the last one, how broad that band was. They would be coming down where this laser pointer is here. You would see those scales in our restruens or quinque fasciatus. But here it's going to be pretty narrow or absent altogether. And then a very defining thing for our Culex salinarius is that terminal abdominal segment is going to be covered in pale gold scales. So it really gives us this like gold fleck look, which really is highlighted when you're kind of changing your fine focus. Like it will really stand out to you that these gold scales at the end here is pretty unique for our Culex salinarius.
Yep. That's just a lateral view here of the abdomen.
Yeah, you can see that there are scales present laterally. This is a little bit of a beat up sample. So, but if you look at these last abdominal segments, you can really see that gold covered scales, and you can see those laterally. Like the other species we've covered so far, they're going to have no banding on the legs and no banding on the palpi or the proboscis.
Back up one. I just want to point out here not to ever confuse these light parts, the joints for bands. A lot of times they'll just be naturally light, or some of the scales will come off and they'll look like bands. So, just to note that it's not a true band of scales. Culex nigripalpus is one of my favorites. And believe it or not, just looking at this picture, you wouldn't think that you can confuse it with a Selenarius, because this lateral view here shows those triangular basal bands on the side of the abdomen, and good specimens, they stand out pretty good. Basically the other half of that 29,000 trap was these guys, and this came out from the marsh. Again, something weird that we've noticed here. Their numbers peak in fall and winter, but other places get them year round. And now, at least starting last year and the year before, we've been getting them. Well, now we're finding them now. So I don't have an answer for that. And I've been wanting to ask Mike Riles about any sort of seasonality with nigripalpus over there in Florida. So again, it's got egg dumping behavior like some of the other Culex that breed out in the marsh. It is a vector for St. Louis, Eastern Equine, and West Nile.
And importantly for Florida, it's the predominant St. Louis encephalitis and West Nile virus vector in that area.
Before going forward, I'm not using common names today, dude, but I've seen black-tailed mosquito used in this one. And so the point that Alex was really making with the gold flecks on the last abdominal segment in Salinarius is that this one will be dark or black. So if you're gonna want to run away with a common name, I guess go ahead with that.
Yeah, and we'll have some pictures of that to kind of show them. But one of the major things that really separates this from all the species we've covered so far is that when that scale, if they do present scale patches, but oftentimes there won't be any scale patches laterally on the thorax, so it's many times just completely barren. But if there are scale patches, they're going to have fewer than 6 pale scales on it. So a very great way to differentiate your nigripalpus from many of the other Culex that we've covered and will cover is looking and counting those patches of scales on the thorax.
And a lot of times they're so barren you don't even have to get that close.
Yeah, there's nothing to count.
Right.
So here's kind of what James is talking about with their abdomen. So they're going to have basal banding on the abdomen, but just like our Salinarius, going to be very absent. They're going to be absent or very, very narrow if present here. So unlike those really broad bands that we saw on the abdomen in our first 2 that we talked about. And then when we focus in on that last segment of the abdomen, it's going to be mostly covered in darker scales. So that common name kind of holds true in that situation. So unlike your Salinarius, which is going to be very gold and beautiful when you look here, on your nigripalpus, it's just going to be pretty dark scaled on that and that terminal abdominal segment. And then a very defining thing when we look at our nigripalpus at the abdomen laterally, they're going to have this triangle shaped patches laterally, which is going to be most prominent on segments 5 through, was that 7? Yeah, 5 through 7. So you can really see this triangle shape. You'll see lateral scales in these other samples, but this triangle look is very definitive for your Culex nigripalpus.
Yeah, good. It jumps way out on good specimens.
So here's just to highlight that very narrow, or in this case, it's pretty almost absent basal banding. So really, really definitive for when you have a beat up sample, look for any patches of scales. If you're getting those patches of scales down here where this laser point is, you can kind of rule out your nigripalpus and your Salinarius because that they wouldn't have a band basal band that's going that far down on each segment.
Definitive, yeah. No banding on legs here either. Or on the palpi, proboscis, clean, dark scaled.
This is why I hate Culex.
It is what it is.
So some of the similarities, just to review, right? Both are going to have basal banding on the abdomen, but it's either going to be very narrow or absent, especially until the last 3 segments. They're not going to have any banding on the legs. I didn't show it here either. No banding on the palpi or the proboscis. But when we look at our key differences that we've covered, some great ways to differentiate these 2. First is to look at that look on your abdomen, look at that like terminal abdominal segments. If you have mostly light colored or gold scales, it's very definitive for your Culex solitarius. Whereas if it's kind of brown, dark colored, even like somewhat like black sometimes, you're going to be thinking about your Culex nigropaljus. And then, again, look at the sides of your thorax. If you are seeing scale patches of 6 or more pale, and kind of get you to that Culex solitarius. Whereas if you have no scales at all, or very, very few scales in groups of less than 6, can kind of bring you to that direction of nigropaljus. But again, that's kind of one of those hard things of, if you have a really beat up sample, like how can you say, are those patches non-existent because they never were there, or did they just get absolutely brutalized? So again, very good to have multiple things to differentiate them. Don't just rely on those scale patches alone.
And what do you do if you strike out on all features? You just go to genus and move on.
Yep.
But that picture on the bottom right is really a typical nigropaljus thorax that we see.
All right, next, a little bit of a fun one.
Yeah, we're gonna throw it, mix it up here now.
Yeah, Culex coronator and Culex tarsalis.
First, we're gonna cover Culex coronator, which we've been discussing about the language moving forward with this species. I've heard it used as introduced and invasive, but I don't know the means in which it was introduced here. So I really don't know if introduced would be a correct term versus invasive. Mike will cover that later better. But this, you'll notice, is a Culex that stands out a little more. And we'll get to the morphology in a second. But this one here feeds on birds and mammals. And we don't see them a whole lot. But when we do see them, they're in areas like the Sankofa wetlands area, which is, there's a lot of ponds and ditches and everything. And we had 97 in one trap yesterday. So sometimes, we don't see these guys at all. It's another kind of weird one where they stand out in the fall and the winter, but no, in certain areas. And maybe they're expanding in those little pocket populations, which is what I suspect. They do feed in floodwater and also containers. They've been known to show presence of Zika, St. Louis, and West Nile here.
Yeah, in the mosquito pools.
Yes.
And just to reiterate what James is saying, if we look at these kind of distribution maps, you can see that that these are expanding farther and farther east along this Gulf Coast, and then up on the East Coast. So if it's not in your region right now, this is something very important to kind of to focus in on, because it may be, coming into your region. And the good thing about these is that, pretty evident, and we're going to go over some of these things, but there's some great things that kind of help you kind of easily identify them, and you wouldn't confuse them with the species that we've covered so far. So the first thing we can look at right here on the thorax, they're gonna have patches of light and pale scales laterally, which I've highlighted or circled in the red. But they're also gonna have 2 dark brown segments on the thorax laterally, which is in these black boxes right here. You can see these kind of dark patches on here. Kind of looks like a bruise kind of on that thorax.
And that's important. You would normally not even look at that and to think about it, but in this little group, the coronator types, they're all going to have that, and we're only going to cover coronator. But when those medium grain rice scales fall off, it's pretty obvious. Those brown clumps of scales are there. So it's important when you lose the white scales that you remember that. Abdomen, if you're flying through it and not paying attention, especially if it's missing other body parts, some might call this a quink. It's kind of got a little dip there in some of the basal bands. And if you look at the lateral view, it also has what Glenn likes to refer to as a sawtooth pattern. So it's kind of similar to a quink, but not quite as exaggerated the further down on the abdomen that we go.
Yeah. And I think this just highlights, like, if you're going through things quickly, you can mistake these if you're looking for, like, if you're looking at a quink, or you're looking for quinks and you're just looking for that half moon shape, you may talk yourself into this having somewhat of a very similar abdominal banding pattern. But you got to make sure to look at all these different parts of your sample, so that you're not misidentifying this species right here.
It's just so sporadic, because you'll have a trap with 300 quinks and no coronator, And then you'll have another trap with like 25 coordinators. So it's like, oh man, they're sneaking in here, the legs fall off. Woo.
Yeah. But as James just kind of indicated, one very great way that these stand out for us is that they're on their hind tarsomeres, they have basal and apical bands. So we have a little highlight right here. If you look at this top picture right here, it's just taking out one segment. And you can see you have that basal and apical banding present on there. So all the ones that we've just covered so far, all of them, as a reminder, no banding on the legs. So this is a really easy way, kind of in your traps, if you have a mountain of mosquitoes, but you have a Culex that has banded legs, you can immediately, filter out all those other options and you start thinking about things like coordinator.
Yeah, exactly. Just, look at the majority, and what I like to do is look for the minority, look for what's different in a pile, and as you progress with your identification experience, you'll be able to move at a quicker rate, which will allow you to kind of spot things like right off the bat. And I'm not talking something as simple as banded legs, but
and then another thing we want to highlight here is on the head.
so actually let's look at the proboscis first. We're going to cover 2 Culex here that have banded legs. This here in good condition will have a pale base to it. It doesn't quite come over the top of the proboscis, so it's kind of just ventrally there. Easily can rub off and make it look like there's a complete ring, but just note that this is not a complete ring going across the proboscis. The back of the head has dark erect forked scales, like most of the other Culex. Occiput has a narrow golden scale band. Palpi are entirely dark in the species. And I wanted to cover the proboscis first.
Yeah, and this is going to be really good when we compare it to our next species. But the main thing to see here is that it's not a complete ring. So you're going to have, it's going to look sometimes like scales have rubbed off, but this is an important feature to kind of understand. And if you get your hands on a sample, really kind of look at that proboscis and kind of sear it in your mind about like what is a complete ring versus a not complete ring. Here's just another kind of view. So on the bottom left, here's like a really nice sample where you kind of see that pale scales underneath. It doesn't form that complete ring, but it's a little bit more prominent here. And then here's another sample where it's really not that great, not that obvious if you're not really looking for it. But you can see somewhat of those paler scales, not all completely dark scaled on the proboscis.
They may just have to zoom way, way, way in,
Yeah.
So the other species with banded legs in Culex is going to be Tarsalis. And this is another frustrating one for me because we get so few that we've actually never had enough to pool for any of the vectors that it carries, which is Western equine, St. Louis, and a few others. And so, we've historically been running a minimum of 5 mosquitoes of one species per trap, maximum of 5 or 300. Always fall short. I think the max I've had in one trap was like 3 of these guys. And then again, it's a weird thing. Fall almost exclusively, but then not anywhere weird in terms of being outside of the city. Rather, these things have been coming from rain gardens almost exclusively.
Yeah, so we've seen them in like very urban areas. It's been weird where we've seen this distribution. It's kind of somewhat random. It's pretty rare for us, but I know that this is a common mosquito in some areas. I'm sure people on the call right here are like, we get these all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So we highlight this again, but here's just a better picture of this row of CD dorsally. So this has been shared amongst all the species we've covered so far. But just to highlight it again, this is what those CT would look like if they weren't like beat up like that first sample and you're just looking for the pores. But very definitively here too, they have rows of these pale white scales laterally.
Yeah, when you rotate your sample, it looks like, someone like painted like with a fine paintbrush, just racing stripes on it. It's really well defined.
So they're going to have these broad basal bands on the abdomen. Again, if you were kind of rushing through and not looking at any of the features, you may think, oh, is that a restruens? Is that a quink? So these are going to be, when you have your pale scales present or your abdomen's in good shape, you're going to have a broad band, unlike some of the ones that we covered that are going to be very like absent or narrow.
if we go back to, I just want to point out too, in addition to those racing stripe type features on the top there, this species is going to have way more clusters there of thoracic scales on the side than most of the ones we've covered previously.
So like our Culex coordinator, they're gonna also have this basal and apical banding on their legs present. So if you see where my laser pointer here, this is kind of that end of that segment, and then the start of the next one. So you can see that apical and basal pattern right here, super definitive. And again, these two species that we're covering right now are the only ones today that we're covering that have banded legs. So a very easy way to kind of differentiate them from the rest of the group that we're covering is if you see any bands on the legs. But they're both going to have this basal and apical banding pattern.
Yeah, so now looking at the proboscis with this one compared to coronator, it's going to form a really nice white ring. And, in good specimens, of course, it'll be complete. The palpi here are tipped in white. Okay, so coronator had dark tip palpi, and tarsalis has white or, pale at least. But that proboscis has a really nice complete ring on it.
And you can really see this here. Like before, we were kind of like highlighting a few little, scales, and we're like, oh, like look at the underneath. Here, you're gonna just look at the top.
Yeah, you can see
top of that proboscis and see if you see those pale scales and a really complete ring.
You can see that without a microscope.
Exactly. So some of the similarities between these, not going to go over all the similarities, but really highlighted here is that they both are going to have banding on the legs, and that's both going to be an apical and basal banding pattern on the hind tarsimers. But our key differences, again, or coronator, that incomplete, their palpi are going to be entirely dark, and they're going to have an incomplete, pale scaling on the proboscis, whereas our Culex tarsalis, we're going to have palpi that are tipped in white scales and that complete ring. And looking at them side to side right now, you can really see that difference of that complete versus incomplete. It just looks like a little underside on this coronator on the left versus that complete ring for our tarsalis.
I also like that we have the two coronator photos on the left, because that does show a little bit more of the variation between individuals with that ventral scaling.
Yeah. Another key difference between these, for our coronator, the scutum will not have that row of pale white scales, the thing that James was talking about, that paintbrush, whereas our tarsalis is going to have that row of pale white scales laterally on the scutum. And then if you, this is another way to look at them, our coronator is going to have those two dark brown segments present on the thorax laterally, whereas our tarsalis is not going to have that specific dark brown segments on the thorax laterally.
All right, we're going to move into another group of Culex here. This is in a different subgenus, but we're not going to dive way deep into that, nor are we going to cover Culex pilosus or picator, because they're so similar to Eraticus that's for an advanced course, and I don't know if anyone's going to cover those two, but we'll touch on Eraticus here. It's an opportunistic feeder. It likes mammals, birds. I've seen pictures of them feeding on box turtles on their head. Mostly found in the southeast. They kind of get up a little bit north there, looking at the range map. I didn't know they got it that far north. They lay their eggs on leaf edges of ponds, so I do breed them in my yard. And they are a bridge vector for Triple E and Western, not Western, West Nile. So,
yep.
Okay. We're going to have, first, the size of a mosquito doesn't always dictate its species based on what it fed as a larva. But across the board, we're going to be looking at smaller individuals here. Culex eraticus average smaller, the average darker, black to kind of a chocolate color. But starting over in the dichotomous key, we're going to be looking for that row of CD on the scutum, whether it's present or without. And this group here, including eraticus, will not have them.
Yep. So that is typically going to be that first decision on a Culex dichotomous key. That's going to be the first kind of question if that's present or absent. So everything we've covered so far, it was present. This is the one today that we're going to cover that does not. have those CD present.
Right. Basal banding, it really varies on individuals. I've seen some that, that come clean across, and then others that were really reduced. But, they're going to be white to a goldish color, depending on that individual. Underside of the abdomen are dark scaled with contrasting white, kind of a checkerboard pattern there.
Yeah. But the dark scales kind of really speak to this coloration that we try to avoid because so many things can affect coloration. But with Culex erraticus, really you're gonna have like a smaller, darker Culex rather than the other like kind of browner colors or like the reddish colors and browns that we've been talking before. If you look at those the tergites right here, it's gonna be dark scales.
Yeah, and like I said, erraticus is probably going to be more variable than some of the other ones. There's variability in sows and restruents, but these can be on each spectrum of that dark color. But again, smaller dark that pops out first.
Yeah, and this is like why we've included like two pictures on the middle and the right here. I mean, somewhat of it is, lighting on your microscope, but you can kind of even see just like the coloration difference and the size of the band difference between two different specimens.
No banding on the legs here.
Unfortunately, it was a really nice thing we had before.
I know, right? Again, like some of the other Culex, they're going to have some sort of pattern behind the occiput there, and they'll be pale in this species.
So we don't have anything really. We're not going to cover these other ones that are very similar to erraticus. So there's nothing to compare and contrast it. But next we're going to move to teratans, which is a really great one. Nice little softball.
It is. It's my favorite Culex because it's the only one that has apical banding on the abdomen. And you can kind of take a gander at those two photos. We don't see enough of these. They're really cool. And the one on the top right is the best photo that we have. And unfortunately, that was before we got our new fancy system. But aside from having the apical banding, we'll cover those other features here in a second. They seem to be pretty habitat open. There's no pattern here for these guys, at least that I've found. They're just here and they're there, and there's never more than like one in a trap. And I haven't even looked at the dates to see if we have a peak season of teratans here. You're always just so surprised to find them. But they'll breed anywhere in swamps, ditches, canals, tree holes, children's toys, I would assume, if they're breeding in tires as well. But I'll tell you what I think is the coolest thing about teratans is that they are specialists almost exclusively feeding on frogs. That they'll feed on blood of other things too, lizards, mammals, birds, and so forth, people. But what I would like to do is an experiment with get it like a 2.5-gallon tank and get some tree frogs, put a top over in a screen and have them vocalize because apparently teratans are drawn to the vocalizations of frogs, tree frogs, pretty common in some of these areas. So you look at where we'll have high concentrations of tree frogs, you might have more teratans. And so I'm curious if we can attract teratans by using, we don't have to use actual frogs, but maybe the frog calls itself, or hang our light traps higher up in the canopy where they might be foraging. They might forage higher up than some of your other Culex.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, man, they're really cool. So they've got a huge splash of those thoracic scales, and the limited samples that I've come across, they hold them pretty well, with the exception of one on the right. I really didn't even want to use that one, but they really stand out. There's this, if you want to call them a colorful Culex, this is about as good as you're going to get, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's other features that make this very easy to speciate, but it is a good example to show, like, right, the picture on the left, that would be like a very, very good sample that we have, where you have these really obvious round patches of pale white scales laterally, but these scales fall off really easily. And so this is one, not a completely beat up sample, but those scales were the first things to fall off. So important to, realize that some of these things, even though it might say that in your dichotomous key or in a picture, that you may run into this, but not to rule it out just because those round patches aren't present. But here is the real great part about this species. It's the only one we're covering that has apical banding on the abdomen. So as that reminder, before basal versus apical, right? So if we're looking at our segment right here, we're seeing that these pale scales are coming apically, right? So after, like how Eric kind of had that mnemonic device or whatever. So this is a unique pattern amongst Culex species in our area. And then if you look on the underside, they're also going to be entirely white, scaled on the underside, the abdominal sternites.
Yeah, and the hind tarsomeres, like they get pale towards the body. That stands out real well when you flip it over. That underside of the abdomen is being just showy white. It's really a showy mosquito when it's in good condition.
Yeah. But really the easiest thing is that you're going to see this apical banding versus the basal banding that we've seen in all the other species that we've covered so far. And here's just another way to just remind yourself, right? So the basal is pointing where it's non-existent on this one. So just show you where it would be if it was basal banding, but these red lines are denoting each abdominal segment, and you have that apical banding present on your Culex teratans. Your legs are going to be dark scaled. There's no banding on the legs, like most of the other things we covered so far. No banding on the palpi or the proboscis, and no other definitive features, scaling features on the head. Cool. So before we go in our review of Culex, we're going to do a quick little quiz or review thing. So you can type your answer in the chat. So the first question is, which Culex species has a broad basal banding pattern on their abdominal tergites with a half moon shape? So we'll give you guys around like 15, 20 seconds to get your answer in on the chat. All right, so the answer on this one is going to be C, Culex quinquefasciatus. So just to review these, there are other Culex species that may have broad bands that kind of look half moon shaped, like we talked about before with our like coronator and things like that. But the answer choices here, Restruens has a broad band, but it doesn't have that half moon shape. And then your Salinarius and your Nigrapalpus are going to either have no band or a very thin band, so not that broad basal banding.
And if there's bands in Salinarius, it will definitely be gold, not pale.
And then we have one more review question here. So, which Culex species has an apical banding pattern on their abdomen? So, I'll give you guys 10 seconds on this one. All right. And if you answered D, you'd be absolutely correct. So that unique banding pattern of that apical banding pattern of the Culex that we covered, or the Culex in the Gulf South region. Great. So just to do a quick overview of some of the things we talked about with Culex, unlike with like Aedes and Anopheles that we kind of went over, there's not a lot of really definitive like scaling patterns on some of these features that really can get out like a lot of them. But what we talked about before, if you have a Culex, you know you have a sample, it's Culex, you got to that genus level, and then you have some sort of scaling on the proboscis, you can immediately rule out a bunch of other ones that we covered. So like if you see any sort of banding, whether it's a complete or incomplete scaling pattern on that proboscis, you can immediately rule out your quinks, your Restruens, your Salinarius, your Nigrapalpus. So this is a great way, especially if you're doing a lot of identification, you're training people, have these types of ways that you separate out your common species that you're finding, so that you can easily kind of get through your nets or your samples a little bit quicker. Helps with that sorting process if you do like kind of a sorting identification. So
yeah, and be careful too, because you'll have situations like I did last week. I had a super tiny quink that for some reason had an entirely pale base to the proboscis, like a Psorophora columbiae looking thing going on, and it was small, really small, and I was just tripping on it. And so I reached out to Mike Riles. It's just a weird quink, but it was just missing the whole series of scales at the base.
And we can do the same thing when we look at like a feature like the legs. So, this is a little bit more obvious, right, on your samples for the Culex we covered today in our region. If you see those bands on the legs, whether, both of these share that apical and basal banding pattern on the legs, you can immediately rule out all these other ones and start thinking about coronator or tarsalis, or vice versa. If you don't have any of those bandings, you can immediately not even rule into your thought your coronator and tarsalis. And then just to show you guys kind of that overview of those abdominal banding patterns. Some it's going to be definitive, like in your quinks versus your restruins, or like the very absent banding or very narrow banding on your Salinarius or Niagara but some it's not going to be definitive at all, and you're going to need to look at some other features to rule them out. And then obviously our nice and easy one, our teratans right here with that apical banding compared to all the other ones that we've covered that have that basal banding pattern. Great. So now we're going to move to a little bit more fun and colorful set of mosquitoes. So we're going to go over our Psorophora. So for our Psorophora genus, some of the typical and common characteristics of this genus, these are going to be typically floodwater mosquitoes whose eggs are highly resistant to desiccation. So they're going to lay their eggs and they're going to need that drying period. And then once you have that big rainstorm flooding event, these are going to come out in large numbers. And before you even put your traps out, I'm sure you're going to have people in your area calling you and letting you know that they're out and about. Some species are predaceous during the larval stages, so they'll eat other mosquito larvae. But something that's shared amongst us, these are all typically pretty large mosquitoes. So again, size is always dependent on that larval stage and the development and the access to food, the presence of predators. But these mosquitoes are all typically going to be pretty large in comparison to our like Culex that we just covered, that they're all pretty medium sized. These will be much bigger. Again, with this apical versus basal, I know we're harping on it a lot, but our Psorophora are going to have this apical banding pattern, which you can kind of see. It's more prominent on our Psorophora ferox laterally, but you can kind of see some of those pale scales, whereas if we look at our Aedes, it's going to have that basal banding pattern. So that's a way that we can, in that genus level, to get between your Psorophora and your Aedes is to look for that banding pattern if it's apical versus basal. But shared characteristic between those two is that they're going to have pointed abdomens. On our Psorophora, they're also going to have discernible scale patterns on their scutum, their legs, and their hind tarsi. And their hind tibia are typically going to be having long, erect scales. So it really looks, and some of the ones that we're going to show you right now have these gives it a really shaggy, hairy look on their hind tibia. So first, we're going to start off with my personal favorite, Psorophora ferox. Very typically large mosquito found in highly wooded areas, and they're going to be breeding in woodland flood water pools. These are common throughout the eastern portion of the United States.
And I tell you where they are super common is in extreme southeast Louisiana in Venice, down at the end of the world. There's some woods down there. I spent some time looking at birds there, and the Psorophora ferox have chased me out of the woods entirely, multiple times, and they love your shoulder blades. If you get nailed on the shoulder blades in the woods, I guarantee you it's a ferox or something close to a ferox, man. Oh, let me tell you want to know a secret? You want to catch a lot of Psorophora in general, go find a cow pasture, set your trap out there after a rain. All that cow traffic and on those ruts in that pasture, you're going to get, that's what happened this week for us.
Yeah. So, and we're going to pretty much say this on all Psorophora. It's kind of a shared characteristic that they're just really aggressive biters. They do come out in these large numbers. So if you're getting chased out of the woods, or, especially after big rain events, like you're immediately thinking of your Psorophora species.
Especially ferox in the woods.
So we'll start with the scutum, right? So there's no distinct pattern on the scutum, but there is a mix of speckled brown and yellow scales splattered throughout it, kind of like a Jackson Pollock painting on that scutum.
And there's other ferox type species that we will not cover here. So when Alex is saying there's no discernible pattern, some do have a pattern versus the random gold flecking St. Helena thing.
Yep. So we look at the abdomen. The abdominal tergites are purplish scales medially, and then you can see this apical banding with these gold scales, which you can see more prominently laterally, but you can kind of see it when you're looking at that dorsal view. but really obvious or evident when you're looking at this laterally. So this is why I like our Psorophora ferox. You know, with ID, we tend to say you don't need to, like, you don't want to memorize things, or it's not forced to memorize things, but they have this one feature which makes remembering them super duper easy. So when you look at their legs, they're going to be dark purplish legs with the rect scales. When you look at your high-end tarsimers 4 and 5, they're going to have this white scaling. So it gives us this name, white socks ferox. So a very easy way to kind of remember a defining feature of your Psorophora ferox is that they have white socks. So that's why I like them, because they're the first thing I can memorize really easily and sound cool.
Right.
So this is just a review slide to show all of these different features here. But we can move on to our next species, which is our Psorophora, our Psorophora columbiae.
Yeah, this is one where the common name is kind of silly because, I just did a trap that had 86 of these. And again, this one was from a cow pasture out in the lower Algiers coast, I think it was. Yes. So I know some of you aren't familiar with geography here. So extreme southeast Orleans Parish. And they explode when we have rain. Just wasn't seeing much of these last couple of weeks, but every trap has had them and had a big push of them this recently. This one has run me out of the marsh in Cameron Parish, man. They have killed livestock, as the slide says, and look, them cows down on the coast in Louisiana ain't doing so hot to start with. So
Yeah.
if you get a big boost of columbiae, they'll take them out. So like all Psorophora, they're floodwater.
Yeah, and I hope I'm not mistaken when I say this, but like luckily we don't have the same kind of rural areas like throughout our parish as some other areas in the United States that get really run through with these. But like they come out in such intense numbers that they kill livestock not by like pain or whatever, but by suffocation. Like there's just so many. It's like swarms and seas of these when they do come out. So hopefully you don't live in one of those places where these come out. I pray for you if you are.
Yeah, I mean,
when these come out.
The residents in coastal Louisiana have to deal with quite a few issues with these.
So that has the dark rice field mosquito, and really you can really see it just in comparison to the Psorophora ferox that we just covered. Really has this dark scaling pattern, splattered, scaling pattern that you're going to see. First, we can look at the palpi. So they're going to have white tips, and their proboscis is going to be has wide light scaled bands throughout the proboscis.
Yeah, that whole base, almost all of the way to the head. Not quite, but it's the good portion of it.
Yep. You're going to see patches of white silvery scales laterally on the thorax here. Not that I don't know if there's a definitive pattern here, but it's going to be splattered throughout the thorax. This is a really cool feature of this species. So we're going to start off first. So they have this distinct subapical band of pale scales on the femora. So that's what's in this bracket right here. You see it's kind of like this like dotted, like spotted cow
It's like
kind of look.
Crazy zebra striping.
Yeah, it's on that. So it's a really, really cool first feature you're going to like really be distinctly drawn into when you have this in your scope. Also on that first tarsal segment, on the hind tarsimer is going to have a pale band in the middle, and then you're going to have just white basal bands throughout the rest of the legs. And then your wing scales are going to have both dark and pale scales on the veins. These are not as broad as these wing scales that we're going to cover later. So they're still narrow wing scales. And if we kind of zoom in, it's hard to see on like a still picture, but if you have one in your scope and you can really focus it on the wing, you're going to see these dark and these pale, which are kind of really hard to see here, but you'll see some of these pale scales as well on the veins. The next, let's move to Psorophora ciliata.
So Psorophora ciliata is an interesting one here because you're looking at some historical records. It was pretty common. They were catching them in traps, and then we went through this period where we weren't seeing any, and then I want to say for like 5 years I had seen one. This past week we got that rain, and one trap had 99. I just finished counting that trap today. I started it yesterday morning, and this trap had 99 ciliata in it. By small measurements, I suppose it is considered the largest biting mosquito in North America. And galliniper is a pretty loose common name that I've heard a lot of people use across the country. So I guess, if you want to use a common name,
Yep.
go for it. So like some of the other large Psorophora, the larvae are predaceous. They will feed on other larvae of mosquitoes and other aquatic insects. The adults will feed on us, horses. I mean, look at it. This thing is enormous. Um, Not to repeat myself, but yeah, it's a floodwater breeder like the other Psorophora.
Mhm. And there's been records, so that distribution is going all the way up to Canada, so Ontario and Quebec. So really throughout this eastern and throughout the United States. We're seeing right here.
The scutum is going to have a narrow stripe. So if you remember what we talked about yesterday with Aedes albopictus and Aedes atlanticus, they have like a narrow stripe going down the center of the scutum. It's more narrow than the surrounding. So, it's going to be there. I've seen it rub off, and what's underneath is kind of like a goldish red. So the pattern kind of remains even without those gold scales. But that scutum stripe is surrounded by black. And then we've got a ton of white scales on the side here, especially going up toward the top right here.
Yeah. And so just like comparing these Psorophora, like the nice thing about these Psorophora that we're covering, they are pretty distinctly looking. Like you don't even need a microscope to tell them apart many times. But like we talked about with that scutum of our Psorophora ferox, where there was no like discernible pattern, just like gold speckled throughout. Like when we're talking about our ciliata, we have a longitudinal stripe of those gold scales. And like James said, even in a beat up sample, there's still something that remains right there. So you have that pattern.
In ciliata, the proboscis is going to be yellow scales, a ton of yellow scales with some dark mixed in. And the palpi are generally about a third the length of the proboscis. The tip will be dark, but you want to really look at the yellow proboscis because another species that looks very similar will have a different colored scales on its proboscis. The hind tarsomeres have the huge erect scales, even more so than what we'll cover next. Generally, they retain pretty well, and the dark legs have basal bands to them.
Yeah. So very, very distinctly looks like very shaggy.
It looks like
hair.
a bottle brush on it.
Exactly. And then we'll move to Psorophora howardii.
Well, howardii is about the same size, apparently just a bit smaller. Again, like ciliate, it's a super biter. We don't get a whole ton of these, which was interesting to compare our ciliated numbers this week versus howardii. So what I say, 99 ciliata from this one trap, and then we had 12 females and 6 male howardii from the same trap. So, there's some competition there for sure. They're sharing the same habitat, but I get more howardii in the woods than I do ciliata. Ciliata seems to prefer like a more open country species than howardii. So you can see the difference already in the pattern here. Looking at the dorsal view of the scutum, there's no row going down the center of gold or red scales. In fact, the whole center is kind of just uniformly black, surrounded on the sides by those silver scales that look like big old eyebrows on them. The side of the thorax is going to have clumps of scales as well. The proboscis is dark scale. Y'all remember what the other one was? Alex, do you remember?
Yeah.
Yellow. Okay, yeah. Yellow scaled on ciliata, dark scaled on howardii. They do have iridescent scales on the palpi and the proboscis. If you get a good specimen, they'll sheen purple and blue.
Yeah, really cool feature of this, and if you get to see it live, it's really nice. You're like, what's going on? But these iridescent scales right here. So if you ever have a specimen in front of you, really focus in on those palpi and proboscis, and see if you see those iridescent scales, and you can see it in some other features as well on that mosquito.
Also, I have never seen a blood-fed howardii ever. They always look like that. Again, hind tarsomeres have erect scales. The legs are going to be yellow and brown here, and the knee joints will be black.
Yeah, and obviously sample qualities are different, but I would say, if I'm not wrong, the ciliata is a little bit more shaggy.
A lot more
those
shaggy.
Erect scales. So another kind of you'll still see these erect scales, which is a common characteristic in all these Psorophora that you'll look at or cover, but a lot less shaggy than the previous species we just covered. So just as an overview, right, as a comparison, you can already off the bat just see how different these species that we covered look, that even you won't even need a microscope a lot of times to differentiate them. But just to focus on one feature, if we look at that scutum scaling comparison, some, like we covered, like Ciliata, are going to have this like discernible pattern, like that gold longitudinal stripe, like an Albopictus. Some are going to have this undefined spattering of scales, like in your Ferox or your Columbier. But then also you can have these like large patches laterally of these white scales in
Big
some.
eyebrows. Go back one scale, slide. That Ciliata picture is cool because it shows that orange stripe real nice going down the center of the scutum. It's also trying to feed on a paper towel.
All right, so we have another quick review question. We'll give you guys around like 15 seconds to get your answer in there. Question is, what morphological characteristic is not shared amongst Psorophora species?
Are you asking me?
I hope you know. I hope I know.
We may not.
All right, so we'll give you like 5 more seconds to get your answer in. So the characteristic that is not shared amongst Psorophora species is going to be that basal banding on the abdomen, right? So that's that big differentiation between our Psorophora and our Aedes. They both are going to share that pointed abdomen shape, but our Aedes are going to have that basal banding on the abdomen, whereas our Psorophora are going to have apical banding. All right, cool. So now we're going to move to Uranotaenia. So these are, again, with the size is like something that we say, like, don't rely on this, but for this genus, absolutely, size is going to be. And honestly, if you're not looking out for it, you may think it's some bycatch. You may think it's some sort of other fly or other thing that you caught in your trap. So you really have to look out for this. The size is substantial.
I can't even stress how small these are. That the first time you see one, you'd be like, oh, okay,
yeah,
how could I look that small?
Yeah. So some of the other shared characteristics or common features of this genus is that the thorax usually will have patches of iridescent blue or white scales. There are other genera that we didn't cover in that first session that will have iridescent blue scales. But with the size and the presence of these iridescent blue scales throughout the body, and depending on the species that you have, but definitely on the thorax, is going to be a really key thing for Uranotaenia. And then the other thing is going to be that they present a bulbous tip on their proboscis. So you can see it's going from this like thin line right up into this pretty like club-like bulbous shape at the tip of your proboscis.
I came across a paper a while back, researching Uranotaenia for something unrelated, and talking about that same area in Southeast Louisiana in Venice, or this is just above it. There's the old Fort Jackson, and it's surrounded by Psorophora ferox woods. I couldn't get this whole paper here, but it's from 1935, and these guys were doing a sweep of different mosquitoes in the area overwintering, and they found some sort of astronomical number, definitely over 100,000. I wish I could get this paper to tell y'all how many they had. It was nuts. But generally, this genus of mosquito does not take blood meals from humans. So it was interesting the number of Uranotaenia sapphirina that they found overwintering in this fort. I guess they were so desperate that they actually were taking blood meals from these people. Not they weren't being swarmed like ferox, but they were bit and made a point of putting it in this publication.
So we're going to cover 2 species. So Uranotaenia sapphirina and Uranotaenia lowii. So we're first going to start with sapphirina.
Yeah, the 3 species of Uranotaenia in the U.S. We'll go over the 2 that we have because the third is a West Coast animal. So sapphirina is the larger of the 2, and their blood meals pretty much specialized on invertebrates such as earthworms, annelids, and leeches. They will feed occasionally on amphibians, but that seems to be their main target there. They lay their egg grafts on the surface of water where there's a lot of aquatic vegetation, cattails, pickerelweed, that sort of thing. Semi-permanent, you can, take that with a grain of salt. Some of these rain gardens around the city here that they're installing, we've found Uranotaenia breeding in these sites.
And like James is mentioning, maybe there have been records of them feeding on mammals, but typically because of what these two species that we're going to cover are not really feeding on humans, so they're not medically important, but still something to be on the lookout and definitely be aware of when you're doing your identification, so that you're not skipping over them and just throwing them in the trash. So yeah,
there is a Uranotaenia overseas that is a carrier of something, and I don't remember what that is. But looking at Uranotaenia sapphirina, the proboscis, like the two species here, will be bulbous at the tip, blue scales on the occiput, but you'll also notice that they have blue scales in other sections. So it's important to note here where these blue scales fall. You've got the stripe down the center of the scutum, like an albopictus, and then you've got some eyeliner going on the sides too. So the scutum has a whole ton of blue scales going on there. Just another shot
of your patches of iridescent blue scales on the thorax as well.
No scales that are blue on the abdomen present here in sapphirina.
Yeah, so this is going to be a very defining thing between the two that we're covering. You will not have any iridescent blue scales on the abdomen with your Uranotaenia sapphirina.
In a perfect world, the iridescent blue scales on this vein here will go about halfway through. And so if you've got a really great specimen and a steady hand and you want to really look at that, go ahead. I'd never use this. Yeah. But it's cool, I guess, hey, look, half that vein is blue.
Yeah, so it's going to be at least 50%. It can be more, but very difficult a lot of times, especially without having, a microscope that has some sort of scale that you can measure things. It's hard to be like, what is 50% exactly? But really, when we compare it with the other one, it's going to be, we'll show a side-by-side picture, but it's either absent or very, very small. So if you do have this iridescent blue scale on this UA vein, it's going to be pretty obvious to you, but there's so many other features that you can look at that you don't need to rely on the wings alone.
I think that was at 200 times magnification. They're so tiny. It's just amazing. Sapphirina is going to have pale knee spots. They can look white or bluish. And Tarsimeres 4 and 5 are dark scaled. All dark. Assuming they don't break off, and then you don't have any.
Yeah. So this is just a side-by-side picture of males and female sapphirina, but nothing too distinctive to that we were harping on here, just to show you guys some more pictures of them because they're beautiful.
Yeah, the males and the females are both colored, brightly, whereas sometimes you're just like, oh, I like this Culex.
Yeah.
Right, my favorite. This is the smaller of the two, Uranotaenia lowii. It's found in the southeast. Now, this one feeds mostly on amphibians, and I don't have anything hard data on this, but something that I suspect is that they tend to gravitate towards amphibians that are more terrestrial versus like tree frogs. So we're thinking things like maybe southern leopard frog, bullfrog, pig frog, bronze frog. These mosquitoes seem to forage lower and not so much as like the Culex teratans, which are feeding more on the tree frogs, it seems. So again, similar idea, if not identical to what I was talking about with the experiment with frog calls and the Culex teratans. It would be neat to set up a tank or a trap with frog recordings somewhere low to see how many lowii we get.
And if you're still listening, he made up all those frogs. Those don't exist. I mean, there's just no way that all those different frogs exist.
You want to go through your knowledge of botany?
Nope. We move on. So, like our sapphirina, they're going to have patches of blue iridescent scales on the sides of the thorax. So that's shared amongst the two. But then when we look at the abdomen, sorry, these are not, this picture on the left is really beat up sample, but you can see, even though it's super beat up, that those iridescent scales can survive. You're going to have iridescent scales on the sides of the abdomen. So unlike the Savarina, it's not going to have any iridescent scales in the abdomen. Your lowii are going to. So this is a really easy way to differentiate the two without having to look at some of these other features. Another very defining thing is lowii. I don't know who called this, but we're just going to go with as a way to remember them. It's not a really easy way to remember it, but they're going to be the pale-footed Uranotaenia. So hind tarsomeres 4 and 5 and the apical portion of tarsomer 3 are going to have pale scales. So like kind of like these white socks, unlike our Savarina, it's going to be entirely dark scaled.
And they're real fragile. They break off real easy.
Yeah, so that's also, it's a really key thing when, you might have a sample and it's hard to count out those tarsomers, and maybe you just aren't paying attention. So you're like, oh, look, there's no pale scale, so it's not a lowii. But those break off pretty easily. So, you need to rely on a couple of other features. Don't just rely on the legs alone, but it is a helpful tool if they are present. So here is an example of one that does not have any scales on it. So that's why we say it's not maybe the best thing, but on their wings, they're going to have iridescent blue scales at 30% or less. In this case, none, because these blue scales can rub off easily on the wing. So unlike that other one where we had it 50% or more, really obvious, it can just be absent entirely on the wings. So our key differences between the two, there for our Savarina, there's going to be an iridescent blue lateral stripe on the abdomen is absent, whereas in our lowii, it's going to be present. So that's one very, very key, easy thing to just see right off the bat with these two.
Yeah, the other would be the striping going down the center of the scutum, like an albopictus.
Savarina is going to have that present. Lowii is not going to have that longitudinal stripe of iridescent blue scales. Looking at the wing, just side by side so you can see that, but really, like we said, we don't usually use this as a defining feature, but just to include it. I know that, in the dichotomous key that we use here, there's not many things that they utilize as differentiation. So it's just another fail-safe if you need another feature to look at.
Whoever did that picture on the left did a good job. I don't know who did. It must have been Evan.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were.
That wasn't me.
I thought you were just trying to give a pat on the back. And then again, this is a very fragile part of this of these species. But if you look at tarsomers 4 and 5 for Savarina, they're going to be entirely dark scaled, whereas for lowii, you're going to have them white scaled, so those little white socks. Cool. So our last review question. So we'll give you a couple seconds in the chat to put your answer in. Which is a defining, sorry about this, I wrote this incorrectly, but which is the defining scaling pattern of Uranotaenia safarina? It should be what? What is defining scaling pattern?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you're being graded on your grammar here or anything, but
I saw another typo before too.
Oh, good, I missed it then.
All right, so we'll give you guys a couple more seconds. So the answer here is going to be that longitudinal stripe of iridescent blue scales that are present on the scutum. These other answers, these are defining features of Uranotaenia lowii, right? So this is the only answer choice that was a defining feature for your safarina. All right, so we're going to move to our Mansonia and Coquetidia. You want to start off? This is your wheelhouse.
I usually made that up completely. Mansonia, we have 2 species, and when I say we're just talking about Southeast Louisiana. These are large, medium sized, not as big as some of your Psorophoras, but they're larger than, say, Culex. They have broad asymmetrical wing scales, so that pattern kind of jumps out. And they're mixed. They're mixed between dark and pale. So they'll, they move them around, it kind of shines out too. Looking at the abdomen, it's blunt and boxy. It looks like they're sitting on a box. If when you have them, it's super obvious. For some reason, their abdomen just stands out more than other genera. Hind tibia without pale band. They have pale bands on other parts of the legs, which we get to that.
Yeah, and this is going to be defining for when we talk about our Coquetidia perturbans. But again, just the highlight here, right? For all the things we've talked about so far, the wing scales were narrow. Now we're getting into these two genera that have broad wing scales. So first, we're going to do a comparison of the two Mansonia species that we have in Southeast Louisiana. So Mansonia diari and Mansonia titulans.
Mansonia diari is the least common of the two that we have, and it's worth touching on this first because the two are so alike that for a while we were misidentifying some of these as the next species, and the features are so narrow to separate these two that, you know, again, you may have to just go to genus. These guys, they feed on mammals, birds, reptiles as well. Oh yeah, there it is, right there, alligators in Florida. Summer they're super thick, and you know, woodland habitats, ditches, they're just, you know, they'll clog up a light trap fan, you know, make that motor stop. In the Caribbean, they are a vector for the VEE, which is Venezuelan. Okay, I was like, I'm not too familiar with that.
But their vector status in the U.S. is unknown as of the last time we looked, but maybe that has changed. And this is these two. Mike Rouse does an amazing job. He's actually the one that really helped us kind of find some more features that we look at between these two. So I'm sure that he's going to be going over this in session 3, and he's going to be a lot better than us.
Oh, he'll
so
definitely miss something that we miss.
Yeah. So we can start up on the head. So the ventral surface of the proboscis has a patch of pale scales, not very no full ring or band that really differentiates it, but they do have that. And then if we look at the palpi, it's something that we're going to talk about here, but it's a very hard thing to measure. And it's really something that you're going to have to, I mean, unless you have some sort of scale or something to do that, it's really going to be kind of based off of your ability to do it with your eyes. And that's, you know, you can trick yourself, but their palpi are going to be 1/3 the length of the proboscis, and they have a club-like shape, which is going to be different than our titulans. But again, you're going to really have to have two side by side to see the difference of that shape to be able to say, oh, this is club-like and this is not club-like. Here is a very important thing that has been really helpful for us. James can speak about it a little bit better than I can.
Mike Browse had mentioned this flagellum area here being uniformly colored or potentially some light scales in Mansonia diari. So, you know, it depends on how much you want to get to species here, if it's important for your program, because, you know, is that a white scale from where it's supposed to be, or is that rubbed off from another mosquito even? So, I mean, this is not potentially the greatest ID to use between diari and titulans, but in good specimens, there is this difference.
Yeah, and when we look at titulans, there's something more to look for rather than this uniform coloration in your diari. So this is this is actually something that, you know, it's I think the only or one of the only things and typically in a dichotomous key that they talk about in the difference between diari and titulans. And that's going to be at the last abdominal segment, there's going to be no spiniforms present. So here's a diagram picture of what it is and just barren right here. But if you're looking at it, there would be no spiniforms present on your diari. That being said, based off of a lot of different factors, your sample may have this last abdominal segment more repressed or receded inside. So many times you may say oh, there's no spiniforms present, but it's you're not actually expressing, or that last abdominal segment is not expressed. So you may talk yourself into that your sample is a diari when actually it's not. So this is something that we did this on our own front. We were kind of using this as the only way to differentiate them. And really, it's something that we were on the lookout, that Mike showed us a few other ways to do it, but you had a way that you've kind of tried to express that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I take these specimens and I see no spiniforms at the end there, I'm just not going to call it diari, because I've learned that if I squeeze sometimes or manipulate the abdomen there toward the end, the spiniforms will be expressed. So I don't know if that's some sort of concealment, but I've learned that if just because it's not there, don't call it diari. And I'm not going to be measuring the length of the palpi.
Yeah.
I'm not relying on that. But I've found in a lot of specimens that I would have just said, oh, diarrhea, you just do a little bit of squeezing on that abdomen and then they become visible.
Yeah. So we'll move to Mansonia titulans next. Very similar to your diarrhea. It's more common for us. And I'm assuming throughout the United States, a little bit of a published distribution is kind of wider than Mansonia diarrhea.
Yeah, and look, range maps, I wanted to say this yesterday, and I may not have. When you have range maps in a book, those things become obsolete the moment they're printed because you're constantly getting new information on geographic expansion, DNA splitting species apart from each other, species being lumped, and all sort of other things. So take all of these range maps that you see online or in books with a grain of salt, shade every bit of a state adequately. It's just kind of like a throwing darts, at a board there.
Yeah. And something that we didn't mention before, but it's shared amongst our Mansonia and Coquetidia, and Mike has some great pictures of this, I'm sure, if he's covering that in session 3. They are going to be like laying there. Their larvae are going to be in these water bodies that have water hyacinth and other aquatic weeds. And the reason for that is that they have this special adaptation in the larva where their siphon is like saw-like, and they use it to puncture the stems of these aquatic weeds or aquatic plants. And so that's a way for them to kind of hide themselves from predators. So they're not going to be like a lot of other larvae are going to be on the surface of the water, undisturbed. They're just hanging out on the surface. These guys are going to be hiding underwater, attached to these aquatic to the root system of these aquatic vegetation. So for control matters, like this is very important. If you're sampling these canals that have a lot of water hyacinth, you may be like, oh, there's no mosquitoes in here. But if you're not, disturbing that the stems of those are pulling out those water hyacinth or water lettuce, you may be missing a prime larval habitat for these species. So it's a very cool adaptation that the larvae show here. We just don't have a picture of that on this slide deck, but yeah.
But you also, removing water hyacinth is one problem, because it chokes out the dissolved oxygen levels. So you end up with fish kills and crawfish kills. So water hyacinth is a bigger problem than just breeding Mansonia. But the problem remains is too, when you pick up the plant, physical removal tends to be, the best effort. Seth is working with this as well. The water hyacinth has a self-preservation tactic where it just drops its seeds once the plant is disturbed. So everything just drops to the bottom of the water.
So to focus in on this feature that we were talking about before, on your Mansonia titulans, they're going to have 5 or more dark scales present on this flagellum. I'm tripping over my words. Flagellum 1. So that can be a very defining way to kind of look at your samples if all else fails, if you need to get to that speciation if you're trying. But again, no need to force an ID. And then up on the top right, here's just a diagram of what those dark scales are looking like, and you can kind of see them right here. And then the other thing that can be a defining feature is their palpi are going to be more than 1/3 the length of the proboscis. And I have a side-by-side picture kind of showing that coming up. And the difference too in the shape, they're not as club-like as your Mansonia diarrhea. So here, if you do have those spiniforms present, that's a really great defining feature to kind of get you to that Mansonia titulans. So that's what these spiniforms are going to look like right here when they are there. Again, like what we were harping on is that this may be knocked off, repressed, etc. So don't rely on it alone. But if those spiniforms are present, it's a very great way to differentiate these two species.
It's a pretty tough mosquito.
Yeah. So just some of the key differences, right? Your Mansonia titulans are going to have those spiniforms present, unlike your Mansonia diarrhea. Here's the picture I was talking about, kind of, showing that less than 1/3 the length of proboscis versus more than. So kind of extended out here, just taking these measurements, and you can see that it extends a little bit further than that proboscis. But you can also look at the shape, whereas your Mansonia diarrhea, it's club-like, and your titulans is going to be more like straight, so not curved with your palpi. And then finally, when you look at that flagellum 1, oh no, I shouldn't be saying these words. For your Mansonia diarrhea, it's going to be a uniform coloration, and with your Mansonia titulans, you're going to have those dark scales. 5 or more are going to be present. But again, just depending on your sample quality, these can be knocked off, and it might not be the only thing to look at. So we want to compare our Mansonia to this other genus that's very similar and can be sometimes mistaken for each other, which is Coquelitia. So like Mansonia, they're medium to large body. They're going to have a blunt abdomen, like our Mansonia, and they're going to have those broad asymmetrical wing scales. That just like those Mansonia that we covered, their wing scales are going to be mixed dark and pale. So a lot of times, like the common names are these like salt and pepper mosquitoes. But a big differentiation here, and we're going to go over some other differentiations, but they have a wide pale band near the distal end of the hind tibia, which our Mansonia species that we covered do not.
And this was once considered congeneric with Mansonia.
So our Coquelitia perturbans, like the name says, that salt and pepper mosquito, because of those, mainly those wing scales, but all the scales on it is kind of that dark and light scaling pattern that really makes it pop. For that, the main thing I want to highlight here, this is our only species of Coquelitia in the United States. So we're focusing, so there may be some other defining features that we're not going to talk about today, but what we're harping on here is just kind of ways that we can differentiate our Coquelitia perturbans from our Mansonia species that we have here.
If you want to apply marsh to any common name of the mosquito, it really should be this one. You know, they really super like marshes, and they have one generation per year, but when they're out, they are out. And it's a larger species too, so you know it when they bite you. Proboscis has a wide pale band at the base, like it's almost entirely pale, kind of salmon colored sometimes yellowish, but that doesn't matter. But the fact that that whole base is pale, and then the palpi are speckled with pale scales. Wing scales shapes here, they're broad and rounded, speckled with light and dark. So the shapes here, what do you want to call that?
What was your other thing, Jasmine? Right?
I was going to go with gumbo spoon on this one, man.
Well, and we're going to have a comparison slide showing our Mansonia. So this is a very defining feature for our Coquelitia perturbans compared to our Mansonia species that we covered, that these wing scales are rounded. And we're going to show you Mansonias that are a very different shape. So that's a very obvious kind of feature to look at between the two. But before we get there, if we look at our legs, their hind legs will have pale basal bands, and then that first tarsal segment, like we said before, is going to have a medial pale band. So that is something that our Mansonia species that we covered do not present. So our key differences, just like I said right here, but I'm going to go to the next slide just to show it a little bit more highlighted. So again, that medial pale band is absent on our Mansonia species versus our Coquelitia perturbans. But then if we highlight the wings right here, our Mansonia species are going to have broad wing scales, but they're going to be cut off on the end, so a little like jagged, which you can see on the left-hand side picture, right? Whereas our Coquelitia perturbans, it's going to be more of a rounded shape, so not as like a cut knife edge like our Mansonia species show.
So like a garden shovel on the left and a garden or a gumbo spoon on the right.
Oh, man. Oh, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. There's one last review question.
I knew there was.
On this. So we'll give you like 15 seconds in the chat to get this. So which Mansonia species that we covered today has spiniforms present on the abdomen and palpi that are more than 1/3 the length of the proboscis? So 2 features to help you differentiate between the two, either Mansonia diarrhea or Mansonia titulans. All right, and if you answered Mansonia titulans, you'd be absolutely correct. All right, so again, if you see those spiniforms, this is going to be a really great way just to differentiate two if they're present. But then there's a few other things that you can look at if those aren't present, or
or if not genus,
or just genus. All right, and then the last genus that we're going to cover today is Culecida. So very reminiscent of your Culex mosquitoes, but if you remember from session 1 when we did our genus level ID, the main differentiating factor between these and Culex, because they share a lot of things like rounded abdomen, narrow wing scales. But the main thing right here is that the base of the subcosta on the underside of the wing has a tufts of setae, and this is going to look very much like armpit hairs. That's kind of the like
What everybody says.
non-scientific thing that we say here, or that everyone says. But this feature here, but it really gives us this like hairy armpit look that's going to really differentiate it from Culex right off the bat when you see them compared side by side. So the two species that we're going to cover today is our Culecida inernata and our Culecida melanura.
This one I do like the common name because it holds true, winter mosquito. And I really like it when my neighbors are like, man, it's winter, but I thought all mosquitoes was dead. And I'm like, no, now it's my favorite time of year. Now we get winter mosquitoes. So they are huge. They're a pretty big mosquito. They feed on large mammals, which would include us as well. Adult females are active throughout winter for the whole southern U.S. And I imagine with some of the temperatures rising in the north, maybe like a change in activity there. No, I'm not really sure, but they can overwinter in the larval stage. And they are vectors of triple E. Now, the curve here, now keep in mind, some of these terms that we use are relative, and I know that's annoying, but you're going to have some specimens that will have, like post-mortem, will have a bend in the proboscis a little bit, but this is really noticeably curved.
But we also, just to differentiate, we talked about it as a defining feature in that genus level for your Toxorhynchites. And if we were to look at them side by side, like your Toxorhynchites is going to still have even more pronounced curve
Like a
and a longer,
angle.
yeah. So this is definitive, or like a pretty defining feature of your Culecida inernata, having that curved proboscis, but it's not going to be as extreme as your Toxorhynchites. But yes, this is something that you will see on any sample that you look at.
Because if you have a small inernata right next to a generic looking quink or whatever, and it might be as close to the same size, so that would be really obvious next to a large inernata next to a small Culex. Thorax scutal scales are uniformly yellowish or gold, and light-colored overlapping scales on the thorax with really no discernible pattern there. Abdomen kind of unremarkable. It's just got basal bands of gold usually.
This is a pretty beat up sample, but
yeah, that's the best looking one we had.
Yeah. And then here's this really important part:
the small patch of the CD at the base of the underside of the wing by C2.
We have another picture coming up that will show it as a little bit different angle.
Yeah, you'll look. This is a lateral view here.
If we look
now we've got the underside. Right on that vein.
So it really gives that those hairy armpits that really will be striking when you look at these.
And being that they're so large on average, you can manipulate this, your specimen a lot easier than you would like a Uranotaenia if your life depended on that. Melanura, we're just going to mention because it's here. I've collected one in 9 years. I think Eric Guidry has one, and I don't know about Janet McAllister or anyone else in the building, but I don't think we've had much more of these. They're just we just don't get them here in the parish, at least. So I don't know a whole lot about Melanura other than it averages smaller than inernata. It is darker, and the abdominal pattern is a little more pronounced, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's smaller. It's noticeably smaller, regardless of what the other may be eating. It's just not as large as inernata.
Yeah, and because of what they are like almost exclusively targeting songbirds, so that makes them a very important amplifying vector for a lot of these endemic arboviruses of concern that we have in our region and in the United States.
Again, typical of Culecida, long curved, dark scaled proboscis, and the palpi are also short and dark scaled. Nothing really happening on the scutum there. It's just kind of brown. That abdomen, it's kind of a toss-up here if you want to try to relate it to maybe a Salinarius mixed with a Niagara palpus. If you want to compare it to a Culex abdomen, it's kind of got that triangular pattern on the side. It's basal, and it's gold like a Salinarius. So if you want to kind of memorize it that way, that's how I do it, but that's just because I've seen so many of the others. It's reminiscent of that to me.
And to differentiate it between our internata, it's going to be either without bands or very thin bands, where our Interneta is going to have more broad bands on the abdomen.
Dark scaled here, small patches seedy at the base of the underwing as well.
Yeah, we don't have it highlighted here, but it's going to be very, like that is that defining or common feature in all your Culecida is going to have that armpit hair,
Right.
which you can see a nice little picture right here.
Not mine.
So again, I mean, you've seen these more often than I do. So like you say, like there's never a time that you're going to really mix these up, but we just put in the comparing and contrasting because these are the two Culecida species that we rarely get or somewhat get.
Yeah, I guess if you would, you were to get a small Interneta, may want to kind of rule out Melanura, the abdominal pattern, looking, dorsally on Interneta. If use the mouse here, in a perfect specimen, these bands would come across a lot thicker, kind of like a quink, but they're just not here. And then in Melanura, they're just coming very narrow or hardly at all, moving down, kind of like a nigra palpus mixed with a sow.
Yeah. And then, another way that you can differentiate them is really the size. Your Interneta are going to be your typically larger one, and your Melanura are going to be smaller to medium size, more like that or more like that Culex size. So, again, size, we always say like don't use them, then we just keep giving you caveats of using it. But that can be another way to kind of tell apart the two.
I don't think I used the word variability as much as I did yesterday.
There's still time.
Yeah.
You can use it right here.
That's right.
So thank you guys so much for being with us for the past 2 hours. We would love to answer any questions, but if we can't get to them, please make sure to email Eric Guidry first, because he loves answering questions. As a reminder, we have our Mosquito Academy where we get to really get a full day of getting to look at every one of the specimens that we cover. And we're constantly growing that program. So we're going to be adding more species that we see in the United States outside of the Gulf South. So hopefully we'll see you there. And it's a great way to really just get your own sample box. You get to keep those samples and bring them back with you and get some really great information there. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your time.
Appreciate
today.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it with everybody. So I know this is Claudia again. There are quite a few questions in the chat. And then also just as a quick reminder, if you need a certificate, please email your full name with your title at education@nola.gov. I know some of you have already been sending it, so we appreciate that so much. And also as a reminder for next week, we're going to have Mike Riles. He works for Central Life Sciences, also a big part of Beacons, and he's going to be really talking about invasive mosquitoes. And so, Stacey, you want to go through and get to the questions that are in there? I know there are quite a few.
Yeah, I'm scrolling back now. We have some comments coming in, so it's taking me a minute. So just 1 second.
We also, while you're looking, we also have some other webinar series that are coming up. We have a 6-part emergency response webinar series, so please be on the lookout for that. I will email it to everyone who's registered for this particular series. We cover everything from all hazard events. What is an EOC? Rodent response, mosquito, and then we also have some case studies that we're going to be presenting. So we have folks from all over the Gulf South presenting that as well. And then also be on the lookout for a series for folks that are interested in animal sciences, animal health sciences. We're going to be talking about vector-borne diseases that are transmitted by fleas and ticks and all different kinds of scenarios. So that'll be coming out soon. One of the best things to do is to sign up at vectoroutreach.org and become a subscriber. We're the ones sending out emails. We know everyone's busy with emails, so we don't send that many out, but we send out some really great things. So something to be aware. All right, Stacia.
In reference to the Culex mosquitoes, does the number of thorax white spots tell you anything?
It separates a few species. If you have clusters of 6 or more scales, you'll be looking at a Salinarius, a Restuans, a Quinca fasciatus. If it has less than 6, then you're looking likely at a Niger palpus. But you'll also want to use other morphological features and not that alone.
And it's important to say again, like this, the subset that we showed here is not all Culex that are in the United States or even in the Gulf South. So, but it does help differentiate different paths, and it's a part of like the dichotomous key if you follow it. Like we said, the first thing you're looking at certain CD on the scutum, and then you can look at like the thoracic pattern and how many scales there are, and that can really branch you out into differentiating between species.
Someone commented when we were talking about the Florex mosquitoes that they had landing rates up to 50 minutes and they had never seen that before. And that type of mosquito is their least favorite to be bitten by.
Yeah, I mean, I think with those personal anecdotes, we've been, especially in our wooded areas, we've tried to do some landing rates and given up really quickly. You don't need that long of a time for that landing rate to just know that we have a problem. But yeah, it's especially with those Psorophora, like with the aggressive biting pattern, and different mosquitoes are going to target different areas of the body that they like to bite. But man, it feels like they're throughout everywhere trying to get me when we've been out in the woods, especially after a big rain event, like maybe like a week or two after a big rain event. Yeah.
In the marsh too. I've been doing bird surveys in coastal Louisiana for many years, and I've got old Write in the Rain notepads where I was taking, bird foraging behavior notes and just smearing blood across the pages because there were so many mosquitoes just all over my knuckles, and awesome.
Okay. Did you stumble on that by accident or were you dissecting? Or when did you recognize that about diarrhea?
Oh, that was completely accidental. I was just manipulating it around, and it just came right out. And so I don't know much about it, or if anyone else has even done that. And I quite honestly haven't tried that technique on any in probably a year or two. But that was pure accident.
Yeah, and it goes to say too, like anyone that's done ID knows that you're like we talk about the sample quality in terms of like scales present, but like also sometimes we have like some very crispy mosquitoes where you can't manipulate any part. Like you're just going to be breaking apart the abdomen if you try to press it. So it's really if like the opportunity presents itself that you can do that. But that's why and this is like Mike Rouse is amazing. Has a great presentation next week, and I'm sure he's going to be going over this. I don't want to, if he's listening and he's not, I'm so sorry. But he has really great ways to look at other features, so you don't have to rely on that alone. But it is a potential way to kind of express some of the more repressed, like those are repressed abdominal segments that sometimes occurs.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex and James, that's really all the questions I see in the chat. If you have any other questions that you think of, please email them to us at education@nola.gov. And Alex, if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being with us and listening to me and James ramble for 2 hours. Yeah, and we hope you join us for session 3. We'll definitely be there because it's going to be really great information. And keep on the lookout for any of the other webinar series. There's some really great ones coming up soon that cover a lot of different topics other than ID as well.
All right. Y'all have a good one, and red beans and rice.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.